To another one of our afternoon webinar sessions, A Day in the Life. Today we have the pleasure of inviting our very own Lizane Füzy. Lizane, welcome. Lizane used to be a professional nurse, and she is here today to talk all about what it was like when she was a professional nurse. Thank you for taking your time this afternoon, Lizane, to be with us.
Hi, Priya. It is a pleasure to be here.
All right, let's get cracking. Let's start at the beginning, Lizane. What did you study to become a professional nurse?
Sure. So I did a nursing degree. There are many options that you can choose. I studied at UJ. It was already University of Johannesburg. It was a BCur degree, and it's a 4-year degree. If you study at some place else like Wits, then it's like I think it's a B Science. So, but it's a bachelor's. So it's 3 years or 4 years. I know they changed recently that you only do a 3-year degree and then you have to specialize in different disciplines afterwards. But that only changed recently.
Okay. Do you know anything about this whole change with regard to the specialization?
So not much, but what I know is that, it actually went back to how it was years ago. So many years ago, you had to study 3 years, then you became a general nurse and you can basically run the ward. But if you wanted to specialize in something like primary healthcare or ICU or midwifery, you had to do an extra year. Then they combined it all. And then you have the colleges where you can also study at various nursing colleges. It's a 4-year degree. You have different options for different levels of nurses. You can study even in private. At Life Healthcare, at Mediclinic, Netcare, you can study there as well. And then for some reason, which I'm not entirely sure why, they changed it back to from 4 years to 3 years. And then you have to take an extra year for every extra discipline that you want to specialize in.
My, okay. Sounds like it can be quite a lengthy journey if you decide that you want to specialize as a professional nurse.
Yes, it's a bit of a waste of time. Not having done that, it kind of feels like it's unnecessary. We've covered everything that we needed to cover in the 4 years.
Yeah.
And if you ever go international, South African nurses are quite sought after because we're so diverse in all the fields that we've got covered.
Okay, that's very interesting. And we're definitely going to get back to that just now with regard to the whole diversity of what's happening in South Africa from a professional nursing perspective. But perhaps you could tell us, when you were a professional nurse, what was a day like in your life?
Sure. So yeah, it depends on the ward that you are in. So there's a difference between like a medical ward and a surgical ward. If you're in theatre, and I've worked all over, but I mainly worked as a midwife in maternity and labor wards. So I'll zone in on that. But if you have any other questions about the other wards, I'm happy to go through that. But typically, in most instances, when you get on duty, you arrive around 6:45 in the morning for handover, because it's a continuous service. Obviously, you need to take handover from people that worked on night duty or day duty, whichever one you're on. You take handovers, that's about 15-20 minutes, and you just go through all the patients, what's happened through the night, anything that you need to be aware of, any problem patients. And then, we get delegated according to duty. So depending on your rank, you get different duties.
Yeah.
Generally, you have a round in the morning where, in medical or surgical wards, you will have some of the nursing staff go through making all the beds and getting all the patients comfortable, taking blood pressures. If you're a professional nurse, you normally have to either make out the delegation for the day, or you check the emergency trolley, because, emergencies happen at any point in time. So you need to make sure that all the drugs, we call it drugs, but it's medication, on the trolley is like they haven't expired. Everything is stocked up, because in an emergency, you can't be running around for adrenaline or an intubation tube or something. So then you have those duties. And then, from there you move on, and it's normally a medication round at 10 o'clock in the morning. So the last one, the previous shift would do is around 6. And then at 10, it's around just after breakfast, you start with a medication round. You generally have 20 to 30 patients in the ward. And then you have to go through all the medications that they have to get. But in labor wards, a little bit different. So I'll go in more on that, because it's unpredictable. You have the same round, you do your blood pressures, you check on your moms, you check on all the the unborn babies, and you make sure that everything's done. But you can walk into the ward and you can think that you take handover at 7 o'clock in the morning, and there's someone that is about to deliver. So you drop everything. I've had days where I walk in with my bag and someone just shouts, please, can you take over? Because they don't necessarily want to complete the delivery, because then you have to sit with all the paperwork and you only leave the ward at 9. So you go in, I put my coffee down, I put my bag down, you glove up and you do everything. But then on other mornings where it's really quiet, you might take handover, and then you just, catch up on all the patients. So you have different stages for different women. You can have them in active labor, or you can work in a more like a high care environment where they're not necessarily in labor. You might induce it, or they're just there to track because they might have gone into preterm labor. So it's I want to say it's like a very volatile kind of environment in labor ward, because you can have a day that is so quiet, and you're not allowed to say the Q word when you're in hospital, because everybody believes that you jinx it. So anyone saying, oh, it's quiet, they will immediately get shut up, because now everybody is going to come in. And you can have days that it's absolute chaos, and you in half an hour, 45 minutes, you have 5 deliveries, you have moms that you have to get ready for theater. So it changes, but it's the same, because every patient, if she's in labor, you progress, and every half an hour you monitor baby, you monitor mom, blood pressure, you check whatever's going on. Once the woman is actually delivering, you can be busy for 1 hour to 2 hours, sorting out the baby afterwards, and mom, and cleaning up and getting her comfortable, writing up your notes. We've got a delivery register in the ward, so you have to that register goes into the national register, that gets entered into the national register for all births in South Africa. So you have to make sure that all the data is captured there. If there's any complications, you have to get the doctors involved. So I've always worked in the state hospitals and high risk, so not the day clinic. So you get different places where you can work, and I chose the tertiary hospitals, which is always teaching hospitals. So you always have doctors, whereas in the day clinics, you often work without them. But it means you deal with more high risk cases. So you have prem babies, you've got twins, you've got sick babies, you've got sick moms who, it can be anything from a mild increased blood pressure to like severe conditions that you have to deal with that's life-threatening for mom or baby. And it carries on for 12 hours. So your work shifts. It's divided into like 2 days on, 2 days off, 3 days on, 2 days off. It's like a kind of a schedule that you work on. It includes weekends. You work weekends, every alternative weekend. It includes night shifts. So some people prefer to stay on night throughout the year. Others don't. But if you don't get someone to replace you, you have to work night shift, and it's for 2 months for the year. So it varies. And if I may, just take a moment there. If you work in a normal ward, if it's a medical ward, you've got medical patients. They might be there for a little bit longer because they're sick, and then you've got different procedures. And in that instance, you always have doctors round. So anyway, between 8 to 10 in the morning, you will have like a flood of doctors into the ward, and it's normally like the consultants, like the senior doctors, the ones in training, the interns that just graduated from medical school. So you join the round. There's always a professional nurse that has to join these rounds and take notes, because you have to make sure that whatever is said during the ward round, you make sure that it happens. And it's the same in labor ward. You have the rounds, but obviously it's a little bit different. If you have a patient that's delivering, then they kind of move on to the next patient. And the difference in surgical wards is it's a little bit of a change of routine. Like you've got medication rounds 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 6 o'clock. 3 o'clock is the worst time of the day, because you just finished with medication rounds, but the day's not done. Like that's day or night. 3 to 5 is like the worst time. If you're on day shift, you would start getting everything wrapped up, because you have to take notes the whole day. So between 5 and 6, you start writing all of your final notes for the day, getting ready to hand over to the night duty. You need to like finish final medication rounds, and then there's always the the non-nice stuff like emptying catheters and any kind of drains that there are in the surgical wards, which is a big reality. Wound care, that's a big part of your day. You might spend hours just changing dressings for patients having different kind of operations. It depends on the ward that you are in. So yeah,
Yeah.
really a little bit of everything, and depending on the discipline or the ward that you are in.
Yeah. I have 100 questions for you, but let's start at this point. We're hearing catheters and changing this, and I'm sitting here pulling faces and getting squeamish on your behalf or on my behalf here. Um, as far as like skills go, do you think that with time someone could learn to be less squeamish about the not so comfortable sort of, like changing catheters, or is this something that's a skill that you require prior to starting nursing?
I don't think you can ever really be prepared. Maybe if you grew up, I don't know, on a farm when they slaughtered animals, I don't know. So I think everybody gets a bit squeamish in the beginning. I've got a couple of friends, even from doctors' friends, that the first time they saw a C-section, they basically fainted. But now they're surgeons. So you definitely don't need to have the strongest stomach. If you faint at the sight of blood, since you've been small and you can't get over it, I would advise to maybe consider something else. But you do get desensitized, and it's a good thing and it's a bad thing, because you do need to have a little bit of a strong stomach. And having been out of the clinical side for a couple of years, if I suddenly see some operation or pictures, I feel that initial little bit of queasiness, because you forget about it. But if you see it every day, you get so used to it that you would literally be dealing with, nasty wounds or something, and you'll be thinking or talking to your friend like, what are we going to have for lunch? And you don't even think
Oh
about
my.
it, because it's just so normal. It's just, if you don't do it, then you're never going to talk about lunch, because you deal with this kind of stuff the whole day.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That
I'm sorry if it's graphic. It's a
no, no, no.
reality.
I have a very visual brain, so as you talking about these things, I'm picturing it and trying to focus over here, and it's definitely challenging. I think I can comfortably say that I'm very glad that I made my life choices as far as a profession goes. But I'm curious about that now. You said something in the lines of other choices. If you are quite squeamish, if you've always fainted at the signs of blood, for example. And that sort of made me think to myself, if you have a nursing degree and at some point you want to do something other than nursing, what could you do?
Oh, 100%. There are many choices. So you don't have to work in the hospital. You can choose to work in the clinics. It's not as exciting in terms of, emergencies and things happening and gory details that some people love.
Yeah.
But it's much more similar to normal jobs, because you work from 7 to 4. You work somewhere in a clinic, and it's literally the equivalent of a GP's office. So people who don't need to go to hospital, but they can't afford private healthcare, they go to the clinic. So they sit in queues from early in the morning, and they come and they see you. So if you're squeamish, it's okay, but you might deal with a bit of snotty noses here and there, or some aches or pains. But that's literally the same patients you would see in a GP's office. They come to the clinic. So that is an option. But if you want to move out of that, you can go, and it depends what you do once you finish your community service here, which is 2 years after you studied. You owe the government 2 years of your life for training,
Okay.
and then you can get out. This is if you went through a university. If you study through private, like Mediclinic or Netcare, you don't work in state ever, but you owe them 2 years or a couple of years for when you work there. But now, depending, say you worked in a renal ward, so that's quite popular. If you have the relevant experience, you can become a rep, so a medical rep, and then you can start going and for companies who sell something for like renal dialysis. If you've got the experience, anybody can do it if they've got the experience. I can't become a rep now for renal dialysis because I've never worked in the ward, but if you've worked there, or oncology, or you're a theatre sister, if you worked in theatre, they often become reps for the doctors. So they go and, these companies that do implants, you go through training, and then they send you all over the country or in your region, and you can rep, and you basically still assist the doctors, but you just don't work for the hospital. You're just there to use your implant. You help them, and then you go on to the next case at another hospital. So differently, there are many other options. If you want to go into academic research, you can even do that.
Yeah. Okay, so it almost sounds like it's if you want to do something with your nursing degree, you need to sort of specialize. So then you're in the renal ward, and then you can become a renal rep, and that's sort of making me wonder in terms of qualifications. Would a postgraduate not have a similar effect for your career if you wanted to do your postgrad but not nurse in the traditional sense?
Only in primary healthcare and public health. So there are postgrad options that will help your career, but now I need to break it down a little bit, because you can do a postgrad diploma in primary healthcare, and then you become a specialist in the clinics, and you can at some point run the clinics. A postgrad degree is not going to help you become a rep, for instance. That is separate. But a postgrad degree, if you want to do a master's, say, in public health, then you can go into like full-on research, and you can even work for like pharmaceutical companies, and you can do research for them. So that's another option. Pharmaceutical companies, they might want someone there. The hospitals, they use nurses as case managers. So you work in the hospital, but you're not in a clinical setup. So as a case manager, you work with medical aides, and you basically review cases of patients and make sure that they received or they used the relevant medical equipment or medication. So you just review the cases because you've got the knowledge.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it helps. Or if you want to specialize in certain areas, like in midwifery, if you want to have your own practice where you perhaps work in a clinic where they do births, or you want to consider home births, it helps if you've got an additional advanced midwifery degree. And in that sense, it helps you for clinic in the clinical setup. But
Yeah.
in my case, I did a postgrad, I did a master's degree in nursing, and it hasn't changed anything in my clinical career, because it was research based, and it didn't include the advanced midwifery. You get some degrees which includes an advanced degree and nursing management, or
Yeah.
nursing education, which means you can then go into facilitation. So you teach in hospital, not necessarily at the university, but in hospital, you're a clinical facilitator. Or you can, if you go into management, you can start applying for jobs to manage a ward or manage a hospital. So there are definitely many areas, but the least clinical one is probably like a master's degree, and that is purely research. That is not going to keep you in clinical.
Okay, that's very interesting. So you've used a term. It's very cool, midwifery, and this is making me think about the fact that you specialized as a professional nurse, as a midwife. So I am curious about this. Out of all of the options that you could have specialized in, Lizane, why did you choose to become? Why did you choose to go the midwife route?
So that's actually very simple. I opted to study nursing because I wanted to help people. That was like the basics of it. And there were many options, and I just started, and I thought I'm going to enjoy theater because it looks interesting. And I ended up hating theater, and I did my time. It felt like jail. And when they wanted to send me back, I begged them to not put me there. And then I thought, you know what? In my second year, I was ready to quit, because I thought, what have I signed myself up for? I don't like nursing because I don't like sick people. So what the hell am I doing? And then in our third year, we got placed in labor ward and maternity. And after 3 years, the moment I walked out after day one, I was like, you know what? This is why I'm doing nursing, because I still get to help people, but I didn't like mentally all the sick people in the surgical wards and in the medical wards, like some wards in the state hospitals I worked in. You knew if the patient goes in that ward, they don't come out of that ward. Like, it was not a pleasant environment, and it's state, right? So you deal with a lot of the really, really bad and ill in our society, and it really gets to you, and you don't always get desensitized to that. So if you struggle to cope with that mentally, that's why I think nurses often get a very bad rep for not caring, but they see so many bad things. It really, you have to harden up to deal with all of the sorrow and the bad stuff that you see, injuries and why they come in. And I ended up enjoying midwifery because it was the happy place. It's not always the happy place. I think it was a reality shock for me when I realized, it's bad things happen. Pregnancies don't always turn out happy, and that was something, but I could deal with that because that was a small part of the job, but it made it worthwhile because you make an impact, like an immediate impact. You help someone, it's a happy day. You don't have sick patients all the time. It's definitely like the happy place in nursing for me.
Why state, Lizane? You mentioned you worked in state hospitals, not necessarily the private sector. Is there a reason for this?
Yes, definitely. I prefer state. I spent, I think, a total of 13, 14 months in private, in three different private settings, and I regretted it every time. State, it's horrible. People think, what they think, how it looks. Yes, it looks bad, and the resources is a problem, but the impact that you make is so much better. Like in private, I always felt like, anyone could do the job. Anyone can bring a glass of water and wipe your forehead and bring you medication. I didn't feel like I made an impact. It's like a hotel. Coming from me, maybe it sounds weird to say private hospitals can be like hotels, but the doctors are everything. They do everything. As a midwife, I was so used to doing my own thing, and there's a special bond that you build with a woman when she's in labor, and you don't lose that, but it's really special when you help her bring her baby into this world. And I missed that in private because you don't do that. The doctors do that. You just assist them, and you do all the bad part is, cleaning up and sorting out. It's not fun to clean up after a birth. It's really messy, and that's the only thing that you have to do. Whereas in state, I got to do the fun part as well, and it's really special to be there for the moms and the bonds that you build up. I mean, you go from, it's a stranger, but within an hour or a couple of hours, this person is the closest thing in their life to support them through a really difficult time. And I felt like I had a much better impact there than in private. But it doesn't come with all the nice stuff. You do struggle with resources. I've had cases where you have to work with a patient and you can't find gloves, and that's not fun, but you have to carry on because the gloves, the supplier wasn't paid, and then there's a tender out, and then you just don't have gloves. So yeah, resources is really tough, but you make a difference for someone that don't often have anything at all, and
Yeah.
that's a good feeling at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is sort of making me think about your comment of diversity earlier during this session. So you talk about the state hospitals doing a lot more at state hospitals, not necessarily having the resources. But you also mentioned the whole issue of there being more diversity in the state hospitals, so you have greater experience, or how would you describe that? Is this you have more things that you're sort of exposed to as a nurse in state versus private?
So definitely, yes, you have a lot more exposure in state because you see things that you won't see in private. But there's different diversity. Like, I think what I was referencing the diversity to before is just purely choosing where you want to work. You get to work,
Right.
or you can choose if you want to work in ICU, in theater, or medical ward. But that is both in private and in state. But really, what stands out in state is because of the population of patients that go to our state hospitals, they really lack education on healthcare. So they often come in when it is beyond the point of really making a repairing. Now you're just trying to save something. It's not even preventative. You just have to like try and save a life or save a leg or something. And while it is really bad for them, the things you learn is something I mean, we have people coming from overseas to South Africa to train here to see and do certain procedures that they will never see overseas. And that's the case in private as well. It gets boring. Like, depending on your personality, maybe you prefer knowing what's going to happen. Labor ward is never 100% boring. It can be very unpredictable. But in state, you just see so much more. Like, your experience is so different. If I can use an example of a twin birth, that's really special for some people. It's something you would never really manage or do if you're in private. But in my time, because they either take them out via C-section or the doctor is there because it's a high-risk pregnancy.
Right.
In my
course.
time in state, I've delivered like I think 14 sets of twins. Like that's quite
Wow.
special.
Yeah, that's
Had that
great.
private.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, Lizane, to go slightly off track here. We've got a question from the audience. Janine would like to know, and I'll just quote her and we can take what we can out of this question. Janine would like to know about the shift timing when you are a nurse. Janine asks specifically, is it crazy 12, 20 hours like it is in the movies? So I think what Janine would like to know is the shifts that you're referring to, the morning or the night shifts, on average, how long did you have to work?
So it's 12-hour shifts. They don't really go, I mean, yeah, it's 12-hour. Sometimes you go over a little bit if there's like extra work that you need to do, but it's not like crazy hours. I think where it gets crazy is the shifts that you are working. So every hospital differs. Most follow the same like procedure. So you work like say Monday, Tuesday, and then Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So that's your hectic week. But the next week you only work Wednesday and Thursday. Now, if it changes to night shifts, sometimes you can work 7 nights in a row, but then you're off 7 nights. So depending on the shifts that you're working, the off days are really nice, but maybe if I can just touch on pros and cons there, thinking about it, the pros of the shifts is you get to go do your shopping on a random Monday or Tuesday morning when everybody else is at work. The shops are quiet. It's perfect. But when everybody else is having a braai and they like socializing with friends on a Saturday evening, you're working until 7 and you can join, but you're quite tired after 12 hours on your feet because you're literally on your feet the entire day. I never missed my step count on a day that I was working. So then, you hang out with your friends. You're not going to stay there until 8, 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock on a Saturday evening because you're working the Sunday. So your social life does take a little bit of a knock. But if you have anything else like a side hustle that you're working on or you want to do something else, you've got a lot more off days, during like your quiet week because you literally only work 2 days versus everybody else working 5 days. So
Yeah.
it's pros and cons.
Okay, all right, that's interesting. And the questions seem to be coming in now a little bit. Let me just see what's going on over here. Okay, so we have a question from Jandre who says, do you have to only work in state hospitals for your practical hours? But I do believe that you covered that one already.
Yeah.
So so your community services in state if you worked at a state university.
Yes.
Otherwise, it has to go into a private one.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, here we go. This is the other one. It's come back to soft skills. So I mentioned the one that I thought was quite important of not being squeamish. But there is a question from the audience with regard to other soft skills that you think would be beneficial before you start your nursing degree.
Okay. Soft skills that you really can benefit from. I think compassion and empathy is like the big thing that you have to start with. And I think that is like obvious. But communication, that's a big thing. Communication is everywhere. But sometimes a little bit of PR doesn't hurt because you get into situations where you need to keep a patient happy, you need to keep their visitors happy, you need to keep the doctor happy, and you need to keep your ward manager happy. So then you start with learning how to manage relationships, and a little bit of communication and like understanding what to say, what not to say goes a far way. But I think the biggest thing is compassion. If you don't really care about, not that you don't care about people, but you don't really worry if they get hurt or you're really not worried about these kind of things, what is the point of doing something like this? You have to have a passion to help people and, not like stroke their hair or something like that, but actually make a difference into getting them better. And then time management and organization, you really need to be on top of your time management, otherwise you're not going to get through your day.
Yeah. So there's quite a few more questions, but I will have to pose them to you in an email if you don't mind, because our time's running out. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank you so much for attending this webinar series and speaking to us about your time as a professional nurse. I hope you had fun.
Definitely did. Thank you so much for having me, Priya. It was lovely to chat to you.
Okay, fantastic. Have a lovely evening, Lizane.
Thanks, you too.
Alrighty, bye.